into the top 8, but keen to see if anyone can actually do that. But we are going to start here on the left side of our bracket with Tangrams on John Sacrifice against Carl Sarap on Bright Dust Goblins, which I guess there's some sacrifice involved, but Muxus is the name of the game there.
Oh, and this is a great opening hand over on Tangram's side. It's just a matter of what to be putting back at this point.
Yeah, you kind of want that Fable Passage as the green source, but it also fits awkwardly into your sequencing for this hand.
And there's even a level where you have to figure out what card you just want to put back, because you could even try to have this Fabled Passage get rolled up as a free way to sacrifice a permanent for Mayhem Devil, assuming you get to untap with it.
Yeah, a card like Witch's Oven is in an interesting spot here, where right now it's doing basically nothing, unless you want to cash in your Mayhem Devil down the line. However, this deck is built so that when you draw a Witch's Oven, you expect it to be relevant in the game, even if you don't find the Cauldron Familiar for the combo. And so, Blood Crypt facing off against Blood Crypt for both players here. None of these fast Skirk Prospector or Gilded Goose starts that really help to define the early turns. But Thoughtseizes for Inglis, a card which he can afford to main deck because he's not building around Collected Company, trying to poke a hole here in Sarap's draw, doesn't find like the Muxus or anything that might be the automatic choice here, but does find a hand which otherwise is pretty resilient to a discard effect.
Yeah, I would imagine Snoop is the thing that you go for here. It's the card advantage piece, as well as the only 2-drop in Carl's hand.
And looking at that hand, the Goblin Chainwhirler might be the strongest card in the abstract, but it's also the hardest to cast with the current situation for Sarap.
Yeah, Phyrexian Tower, not the most attractive card here.
So there is Scope Prospect off the top. Maybe a turn too late. But now we're going to get to see Inglis land that Mayhem Devil. And usually when you play a Mayhem Devil, you're kind of crossing your fingers to get to untap with it. That's not really a dynamic against Goblins, which doesn't have a good way to remove a 3/3 creature.
Oh, and we could even just see the nightmare scenario if you're in Carl's seat, where 10 grams Inglis gets to claim the Firstborn, one of these 3 drops, before playing the Witch's Oven. And if Carl sacrifices it, Mayhem Devil just picks off this Skirk Prospector.
Yeah, claim the Firstborn, a disgustingly good pickup for Inglis there, who flooding a little bit, but I think those 2 spells in his hand are going to be enough to put Sarap under some real pressure.
Yeah, this is just such an awkward position, because if you don't have that Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven making a food is just another permanent that David Inglis can sacrifice.
Exactly, at instant speed, no less, in case there's any Scope Prospect shenanigans. And so now I think we have to see Scope Prospector sacrificing the Chieftain, or maybe not. This is the thing, because there's no onboard sacrifice outlet. So if this is just Inglis using his claim while he has it, then you don't want to sacrifice it. But otherwise, you potentially get punished by handing that one over. And given that Mayhem Devil is symmetrical, it works with both players' sacrifice outlets, Inglis still could turn the Prospector against itself in that scenario, but Witch's Oven is kind of the maximum punishment here.
Krinko off the top's actually an interesting one. This is one that could allow Carl to actually go over the top of Mayhem Devil. Inglis really needs to just find more things to sacrifice here.
Okay, how do we feel about Trail of Crumbs?
Yeah, no, no, for sure, yeah.
Absolutely. It is a little awkward mana-wise for Inglis, who, if we play the Trail, then we can't sacrifice both food tokens unless we're also willing to sacrifice the Mayhem Devil, and we really would rather keep that one around.
Yeah, this is a position where you even have the luxury of seeing what card you get off of Trail of Crumbs before having to decide if you sacrifice Mayhem Devil or not.
Okay, pop quiz on the Goblin War Chief, Phyrexian Tower, Muxus interaction.
Good for you. Or good for the Goblins player, since you can announce the spell, its cast is locked in, and then during the cast or cost paying portion of the spell, you can then sacrifice the creature that was reducing its cost.
There it is. So that's Krenko.
This is the second time in 2 rounds that we've seen Forgotten Cave be incredibly awkward for Carl.
Is it especially awkward in this spot? I guess we would ideally want to war chief into Krenko and then really turn the dial out to 11, but...
Yeah, I would argue this is incredibly awkward.
It's tough because you don't really pay attention to the times where Forgotten Cave helps you, where it's the the 7th land when you're flooding, but the times where you're trying to curve out perfectly and it's the worst possible land you can imagine, those stand out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, to quote myself with Cedric previously, my favorite place to have Forgotten Cave is in the graveyard.
So Mayhem Devil doing some work to contain this battlefield here.
Second copy of Mayhem Devil coming off of Trail of Crumbs is really going to do a lot.
That is a nice one.
Catch Inglis back up on this battlefield.
Yeah, ideally we want to find another source of sacrifice triggers so we can shoot down the Krenko. We may end up having one of the Mayhem Devils take one for the team if we insist on getting that off the board right now.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that bad to play out a Mayhem Devil, put a couple points on the Krenko via the food on the table, and then sacrifice one of the Mayhem Devils to Witch's Oven to pick off the 1/1 and finish off this Krenko.
There's also the fact that, look at this, we can attack Sarap down to 9, we play the second Devil. If we just don't care about the Krenko, we're not that far away from just burning Sarap out with the Mayhem Devil triggers.
Yeah, that's a fair point as well. We're looking at minimum 2 points just from sacrificing the food.
We're hearing that Lucas Twist has taken game 1 over Ari Lack. So Ari 7-0, I believe, in this tournament so far, looking to avoid falling to 7-1, trying to get that 10-0 undefeated streak for this tournament.
And that's a big upset in particular with Ari on the play with a Thoughtseize deck, losing to Rakdos Goblins. That is what the Sultai deck wants to be doing. Losing there has gotta feel awful if you're in Lax's position.
So here's the second Mayhem Devil. And we can shock in the Overgrown Tomb so that when we sacrifice the food, we get to use Trail of Crumbs, which seems like it's worth it. Our life level isn't under that much pressure, and if it is, then we can shoot down something else.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is the way to actually not have to send so much damage at the Krenko, is you can just force Sarap to keep having to tap the Krenko, and you just try to fight through all of the 1/1s with your Mayhem Devils.
Yeah, it maybe gets harder if there's something like a Goblin Chieftain waiting in the wings. Goblin War Chief is there instead, which isn't quite as scary.
And this plays both sides of things, right? It contains the battlefield a bit, but also plays to just having the game in reach for Inglis, like you alluded to previously, where, like, how much can Carl afford to be blocking here? But also, what are you going to do?
So What's the alternative? My question for you as the analyst is that a Canyon Slew, a Canyon Slough, even a Canyon Slough? Where are we landing on that?
It's a really expensive Forgotten Cave, unfortunately.
It sure is. It's a Forgotten Cave that casts Umori, I suppose, and Thoughtseize, of course, but... It is funny that even in mono-red goblins, Umori is effectively free for the most part, so is it worth using your sideboard slot on a card which you can only cast off however many copies of Phyrexian Tower you play?
I would say no, but I'm not going to fault people who like it.
So Sarap does get to churn out a bunch more goblins with Krenko, but now Gilded Goose offering not just a food token in its own right, but something that we can sacrifice to the Witch's Oven for another set of triggers.
There's at least 6 damage between sacrificing the goose to oven, getting a second food, and then sacrificing the 2 foods, just paying mana.
And so this is where you go through the thought process of how many times can I afford to use Trail of Crumbs? What exactly am I looking for? What combinations of things translate into an instant kill or help me kind of protect against maybe the worst case Muxus situations? And David Inglis, as someone who was one of the best KCI players in Modern in the world for a long time, he is very adept at going through that kind of quick arithmetic.
And now you can see Inglis kind of forced to pick where do you want to send your first couple of points of damage while you're doing this calculus. This is one of the hardest decisions of this game.
We're hearing that Daniel Garcia Rosas has won game 1 over Michael Bonda there. Rakdos Pyromancer a game up over a different build of John Sacrifice with Collector Company. Oh, and look at that.
That should do
That's
it.
it. I think that's just lethal on the spot, right? That's 8 down to 7.
God.
Yeah, wow.
It's down to 6.
This is why...
Down to 4. Okay, maybe not quite dead. Down to 1?
Well, we get the drain from the familiar, and then everything else is 2, right?
But we can only activate
we need
so many times. So you get 1 extra drain from familiar. You get 2 from sacking
4, 2,
it.
down to 1.
Right.
So maybe it is worth passing the turn at this point and just having those instant speed activations on tap.
Another oven or a cauldron familiar could do it, though, since Trail of Crumbs gets an activation here.
Oh, if we trail, sure.
So you play out your forest, tap the forest to actually look at the next card.
Or even Fable Passage, right? If we don't, that's kind of awkward then, because you're hedging versus, familiar versus Fable Passage.
How do you feel about Skirt Prospector off the top?
I love it. Never going to turn down a Scout Prospector. If you can't handle Scout Prospector at its, drawn on turn 8 against 2 Mayhem Devils, you don't deserve it at its turn 3 Marxist.
Look, if you can't handle it at its Dark Ritual, you don't deserve it as its one with nothing.
It's Mons Goblin Raiders. So Sarap does pack it in. And you can see there, if you want to pre-order Zendikar Rising, being released in a few weeks, sure to shake up every constructed format. You can do that now at starcitygames.com/ZNR. And as these players look towards sideboarding, what stands out to you for either of them here?
So looking over at Inglis's sideboard, the biggest things I expect to come in are just more removal. Things that actually allow to interact at lower points on the curve. I don't think things like Corvold are necessarily what these games are about, because those are spells that are just big and clunky and are there for you to help turn the corner. But generally, if you can actually contain what Carl Sarap's brought to the table, these Goblins decks, you're not going to struggle to win those games that frequently.
Yeah, we've got some Abrades. We have 3 copies of Witch's Vengeance, which is a big deal for sure. How useful do you think a card like Thoughtseize is? Maybe not against goblins in general, but for a deck like John Sacrifice against goblins.
I think that having things that find specifically Mayhem Devil is just worth more than almost anything else. We saw that last game, how despite not really drawing any true removal, quote unquote, Inglis just took over a game with 2 copies of Mayhem Devil, and that really is the story of this matchup a good chunk of the time, and that's why we also see Inglis hesitating to cut those copies of Corvold, is it just plays to what he already believes is the best card in the matchup.
Yeah, I want to draw your attention to Carl Sarap's sideboard, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. So first of all, we have the full 4 copies of Leyline of the Void, which lines up very well against some builds of John Sacrifice, less so against this Vraska Corvold engine. It does hit Cauldron Familiar, so that's an issue, but I think this is kind of what David Inglis and his team was going for. One of the things they were hedging against with this less graveyard-centric focus. But then also we have the 3rd and 4th copies of Goblin Chainwhirler, along with 2 Call of the Death Dweller. So that gives you like this alternate combo where Chainwhirler is just a fine card in general and in the matchup, but then also with Call of the Death Dweller, bringing it back, putting that Death Touch counter on it, sweeping the opponent's entire battlefield. That gives you lines of play that typical Goblin decks just don't have access to.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I imagine that Carl is happy to be reaching for here is just those copies of Abrade, because that checks both Witch's Oven as well as those Mayhem Devils, which is just the defining card of this matchup.
And for David Inglis, a hand which basically does nothing, except you do have the best card in your sideboard for this matchup. So a kind of feast and famine aspect of that. Carl Sarap with a slow Ishtar, but he'll get to lead on Conspicuous Snoop with his choice of follow-ups. Oh, and a second Witch's Vengeance there for Inglis. So now, would you just fire off the Abrade on the Snoop, or are you hoping to allow Carl to develop his board, looking to get some more value from a Witch's Vengeance.
I think you want to go ahead and just abrade it here because Conspicuous Snoop is the kind of card where it just is going to be an army by itself. And so it's rare you're actually going to get that many more cards out of Carl's hand with your Witch's Vengeance. And getting cards off the top of their library just translates to you losing life while not firing your spells off.
And we're now back in a similar situation where you can consider maybe just trading one for one with the War Chief, but then if you let the War Chief live, that board could get out of control very quickly, to the point where Witch's Vengeance might not actually be good anymore.
I think this is a spot where you just want to go ahead and take a turn off, just because outside of Phyrexian Tower into Muxus, you know that Witch's Vengeance can just mop up most of the things that go wrong here.
And this is exactly what you're hoping for as Inglis, right? That, you take your licks of one turn, and now you get to sweep up everything.
Yep, and look, you don't even have to type Goblin in. It's right there for you. You click it, couple clicks, turn's done. You love it.
And we're getting some other results in from our other matches, speeding through this top 8, where Lucas Twist has put an end to our Relaxers run. Lucas Twist on Raptors Goblins, moving on to our semifinals. And then Kutari Ichibashi, the Bank Control representative in our top 8, one of his at least 3 now, I believe, top 8s, defeating Kyle Norman on Sultai 2-0 to move on to our semifinals too. So we already have a good idea of what the semifinals will look like. One of the questions is, which of these players is going to join them?
Honestly, hard to argue with Witch's Vengeance number 2 at this point. You could theoretically just claim the Firstborn, the Conspicuous Snoop, to try and deal with it that way if you want to try and look for something else with your Trail of Crumbs.
Yeah, I think there are good, appealing arguments for both plays there. We are now in just natural hardcast Muxus territory, which places Inglis on a clock of sorts, where every draw step that he gives Sarap now is potentially lethal.
And there's a point when you know the top card is Mountain that you aren't going to worry that much about what happens with this Goblin Chieftain next turn. There's only one unknown in Carl's hand at this point.
That is fair. And the Canyon something or other in Sarap's hand will give him a redraw towards that potentially game-ending Muxus. Well, okay. Sure, whatever.
Prospector. Never mind.
Our director is laughing. I'm not sure if that's a pity laugh or exactly what we're going for.
It's very polite of them. I appreciate it. I hope our viewers do.
So now, this is a crucial sequence for Inglis. We can gain some life back with the food, we can dig with the Trail of Crumbs, and if we find that Mayhem level, if we find something that can stabilize his board, then I think Inglis has to like his position. Even just something like a Cold Familiar would be fantastic here.
Yeah, just trying to find any action at this point is huge, and it's a kind of scary not knowing what's going to come off the top of Carl's deck anymore. And we see Inglis weighing, do I just want to draw this Abrade, or is it worth actually activating Trail of Crumbs here when if the next card down is another spell, you actually just brick.
And so things are fine for Inglis right now, but as we said, he's on this fundamental clock where even once he stabilizes, he can't rest on his laurels. He has to get the game over with, or there's always this looming threat of Muxus.
Well, Dragon Skull Summit, not quite the Muxus that Carl was hoping for.
Couldn't they have put just like Goblin Recruiter in Jumpstart 2? Would that have been too much to ask?
Honestly, I think it's unfair that they didn't.
Okay,
speaking of unfair.
Well, sure. I mean, not on the same scale exactly, but Goblin Familiar, a really good pickup for Inglis.
Yeah, this card is basically just going to generate as many copies of Sleight of Hand as Inglis wants every turn.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Grizzlebrand if you think about it. We're gaining life, draining life, drawing cards. One mana Grizzlebrand sounds pretty broken.
I've never been so relieved to not think about it,
Well, okay, there it is.
All right,
there's the hammer.
Turn. Let's see it.
Carl giving us a nice little sweat here. The auto tapper tapping the tower. I'm not sure if that's what Carl was wanting there, but Arena does its thing.
They played it out before the Muxus, so
let's spin the wheel. Well, Okay. That's reasonable.
Honestly, so embarrassing watching the stream today.
Yeah, Emma, this is the best card in your deck. This is what you're building around. What's going on here?
This is the third or fourth time I've seen it generate a 2/2.
That's a good rate for limited, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Not that anyone actually plays that anymore, we understand. But, you know, hypothetically. Something from the before times.
Well, Inglis only finding lands.
Using the oven now. I imagine saving the food, not looping it just yet so we get those trail triggers. And I wonder if now the Abrade will combine with the Witch's Vengeance to also kill the Muxus.
Honestly, I kind of expect just Witch's Vengeance to happen here. Muxus is just a chumpable threat whenever you have a Cauldron Familiar on the battlefield.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And the Abrade can contain something like a Krenko that could get out of control.
Exactly. Being able to check that or any of the Haste Lords. You just look so silly when one of the worst draws that Carl could have is another copy of Muxus. If you end up spending an Abrade containing this one as well.
I don't hate just drawing, 4 cards potentially with our Trails of Crumb?
Oh yeah,
Trail
with
of
so much
Crumbs.
food on the battlefield, you could even just sacrifice the cat to the Phyrexian Tower here, as you were alluding to before, to generate extra mana that way.
That's nice. And Michael Bonda has forced a game 3 against Daniel Garcia Rosas, and John Sacrifice against Ragnos Pyromancer.
Love the show of patience from Inglis. Love holding the Abrade and just choosing to chump the Muxus.
I wonder if Muxus is even going to bother attacking, given how both players know that dynamic plays out.
It's just a free sacrifice for Inglis. Which is a weird thing to think about, but that is just the reality of that interaction.
And Trail of Crumbs can be a somewhat clunky card at times, but this is a kind of board state where it really shines, right? We are really seriously going off now. Sacrifice a Familiar to the tower, we get 2 mana back. Sacrifice a food to bring back the Familiar, draw 2 cards.
Woof.
There's a Witch's Oven. So if we find a Mayhem Devil here, I'm ready to call this one.
This is no sacrifice our battlefield to Bontu, but this is a lot.
How does Corvold sound?
Oh, it sounds.
And so I have to think the calculation this turn is, alright, I have this game on lock unless there is a ridiculous Muxus sequence. What's the best way to hedge against that? Is it just holding up a Braid? Is there some other thing I need to consider here?
I imagine at this point you can even just develop the Corvold on the battlefield. I'm not even sure holding up a Braid is that important. It's hard to say. You just have to get so unlucky in such a way where I'm not confident that a Braid fixes it.
I'm thinking something like it tags a War Chief or a Chieftain that's allowing some gigantic attack.
Sure, it just, when you have Gilded Goose and Corvold and Cauldron Familiar that can all be blockers as well.
That's fair.
Cauldron Familiar with food, just really turning Phyrexian Tower into Eldrazi Temple, is absurd.
I think I want to sacrifice a Trail of Crumbs here. Does that sound ridiculous? If only because I don't have to click through as many triggers on Arena.
Look, you aren't losing a normal game. So you got to make sure you just reduce the actual stress being placed on the program.
There it is. Inglis optimizing his APM by taking out one of those Trail of Crumbs. And now...
just leaving up a Braid. Who cares? We got him.
And now Carl Sarap with his really interesting take on Ragnos Goblins. He needs to make something happen this turn, and Krenko is not it.
And we are getting word that Michael Bonda has defeated Garcia Rosas 2-1, coming back after being down a game. That is going to put Michael Bonda into the top 4.
So yeah, we have our semi-finalists. That was blisteringly fast. And I don't know if that's a sign of the speed of Historic or all these players just playing crisply